and wet and disorganized by the confusion produced in crossing the stream. A part of Hannibal's reserve were to be placed in an ambuscade. There were some meadows near the water, which were covered in many places with tall grass and bushes. Hannibal went to examine this spot and found that this shrubbery was high enough for even horsemen to be concealed in it. He determined to place 1,000 foot soldiers and 1,000 horsemen here, the most efficient and courageous in the army. He selected them in the following manner. He called one of his lieutenant generals to the spot, explained somewhat of his design to him, and then asked him to go and choose from the cavalry and the infantry 100 each, the best soldiers he could find. These 200 were then assembled, and Hannibal, after surveying them with looks of approbation and pleasure, said, "Yes, you are the man I want, only instead of 200 I need 2,000. Go back to the army and select and bring to me, each of you, 9 men like yourselves." It is easy to be imagined that the soldiers were pleased with this commission, and that they executed it faithfully. The whole force thus chosen was soon assembled and stationed in the thickets above described, where they lay in ambush ready to attack the Romans after they should pass the river. Hannibal also made arrangements for leaving a large part of his army in his own camp, ready for battle, with orders that they should partake of food and refreshments and keep themselves warm by the fires until they should be called upon. All things being thus ready, he detached a body of horsemen to cross the river and see if they could provoke the Romans to come out of their camp and pursue them. "Go," said Hannibal to the commander of this detachment, "pass the stream, advance to the Roman camp, assail the guards, and when the army forms and comes out to attack you, retreat slowly before them back across the river." The detachment did as it was ordered to do. When they arrived at the camp, which was soon after break of day, for it was a part of Hannibal's plan to bring the Romans out before they should have had time to breakfast, Sempronius, at the first alarm, called all the soldiers to arm, supposing that the whole Carthaginian force was attacking them. It was a cold and stormy morning, and the atmosphere being filled with rain and snow, but little could be seen. Column after column of horsemen and of infantry marched out of the camp. The Carthaginians retreated. Sempronius was greatly excited at the idea of so easily driving back the assailants, and, as they retreated, he pressed on in pursuit of them. As Hannibal had anticipated, he became so excited in the pursuit that he did not stop at the banks of the river. The Carthaginian horsemen plunged into the stream in their retreat, and the Romans, foot soldiers and horsemen together, followed on. The stream was usually small, but it was now swelled by the rain which had been falling all the night. The water was, of course, intensely cold. The horsemen got through tolerably well, but the foot soldiers were all thoroughly drenched and benumbed, and as they had not taken any food that morning, and had come forth on a very sudden call, and without any sufficient preparation, they felt the effect of the exposure in the strongest degree. Still they pressed on. They ascended the bank after crossing the river, and when they had formed again there, and were moving forward in pursuit of their still flying enemy, suddenly the whole force of Hannibal's reserves, strong and vigorous just from their tent and their fires, burst upon them. They had scarcely recovered from the astonishment and the shock on this unexpected onset, when the 2,000 concealed in the ambuscade came sallying forth in the storm, and assailed the Romans in the rear with frightful shouts and outcries. All these movements took place very rapidly. Only a very short period elapsed from the time that the Roman army, officers and soldiers, were quietly sleeping in their camp or rising slowly to prepare for the routine of an ordinary day before they found themselves all drawn out in battle array some miles from their encampment and surrounded and hemmed in by their foes. The events succeeded each other so rapidly as to appear to the soldiers like a dream. But very soon their wet and freezing clothes, their limbs benumbed and stiffened, the sleet which was driving along the plain, the endless lines of Carthaginian infantry hemming them in on all sides, and the columns of horsemen and of elephants charging upon them, convinced them that their situation was one of dreadful reality. The calamity, too, which threatened them, was of vast extent, as well as imminent and terrible. For, though the stratagem of Hannibal was very simple in its plan and management, still he had executed it on a great scale, and had brought out the whole Roman army. There were, it is said, about 40,000 that crossed the river, and about an equal number in the Carthaginian army to oppose them. Such a body of combatants covered, of course, a large extent of ground, and the conflict that ensued was one of the most horrible scenes of the many that Hannibal assisted in enacting. The conflict continued for many hours, the Romans getting more and more into confusion all the time. The elephants of the Carthaginians, that is, the few that now remained, made great havoc in their ranks, and finally, after a combat of some hours, the whole army was broken up and fled, some portions in compact bodies, as their officers could keep them together, and others in hopeless and inextricable confusion. They made their way back to the river, which they reached at various points up and down the stream. In the meantime, the continued rain had swollen the waters still more, the lowlands were overflowed, the deep places concealed, and the broad expanse of water in the center of the stream whirled in boiling and turbid eddies, whose surface was roughened by the December breeze and dotted everywhere with the drops of rain still falling. When the Roman army was thoroughly broken up and scattered, the Carthaginians gave up the further prosecution of the contest. They were too wet, cold, and exhausted themselves to feel any ardor in the pursuit of their enemies. Vast numbers of the Romans, however, attempted to recross the river and were swept down and destroyed by the merciless flood, whose force they had not strength enough remaining to withstand. Other portions of the troops lay hid in lurking places, to which they had retreated until night came on, and then they made rafts on which they contrived to float themselves back across the stream. Hannibal's troops were too wet and cold and exhausted to go out again into the storm, and so they were unmolested in these attempts. Notwithstanding this, however, great numbers of them were carried down the stream and lost. It was now December, too late for Hannibal to attempt to advance much further that season, and yet the way before him was opened to the Apennines by the defeat of Sempronius, for neither he nor Scipio could now hope to make another stand against him till they should receive new reinforcements from Rome. During the winter months Hannibal had various battles and adventures, sometimes with portions and detachments of the Roman army, and sometimes with the native tribes. He was sometimes in great difficulty for want of food for his army, until at length he bribed the governor of a castle, where a Roman granary was kept, to deliver it up to him, and after that he was well supplied. The natives of the country were, however, not at all well disposed toward him, and in the course of the winter they attempted to impede his operations and to harass his army by every means in their power. Finding his situation uncomfortable, he moved on toward the south, and at length determined that, inclement as the season was, he would cross the Apennines.